In this video, we're going to be talking about turnover speed and how Noah Lyles has such great turnover speed, comparing him to a novice sprinter and just showing some of the differences that Noah Lyles is able to achieve in his turnover, which makes it so he's able to cover great distance per step, which is really the name of the game when it comes to improving your speed and where a lot of people can get significantly better within their own sprinting technique. And so at the end of this video, you're going to have a better understanding of the turnover speed necessary to be able to run faster and what are some of the key things in your body position that ends up really making it or breaking it when it comes to having great turnover. We're going to go and hop right into the video here. We can see Noah Lyles here on the right, and then we have novice athlete here on the left, and we're going to start from this push-off position. So it really stands out when watching Noah Lyles go through his sprint is as he's pushing off, what he does through the foot and the amount of range that he's able to get through in the turnover. So we're talking about turnover speed, and part of the reason that he's able to have such great turnover speed really comes from the push off. And so what we're seeing is as this foot is leaving the ground, we see a great amount of action coming forward in his foot and also in the knee. So what we commonly see, as we can see on the left, we'll see him push off, and notice we're not seeing nearly as much movement in the foot. So see how his foot's facing all the way back where his facing more down. And we also are seeing a lot different range in the legs. So we can see with Noah Lyles, he's getting into like a 90 position, or his knee is right underneath his hip here. And we can see a lot of height with that foot where it's almost like his foot is almost behind his butt, where we can see here, we're not seeing nearly that type of height. And again, what I was saying at the beginning is what happens with turnover speed is not necessarily how fast we're turning the legs. If we watch to see this, and you can see at the bottom, when we look at the whole stride, we end up having the same foot contact time. So you can see here at the bottom, I already did this here. We can see that they're both striking the ground at the same time. So from when novice athlete comes off the ground in comparison to when Noah Lyles comes off the ground and then goes through that whole leg cycle such back on the ground, that is the same amount of time, even though we see at the toe off position, right? I'll go do the same thing here. So we're looking at the toe off position. We see a lot bigger range as that foot's coming off the ground. Look at the angles here. So I'm just drawing this line heel kind of through the hip position. 137, 127. It's a guesstimate, right? It's not going to be perfect here, but we can see bigger number, right? As the foot comes off the ground, more height in the foot as the foot's coming off the ground. Also, as he's coming through, I mean, you could probably say this guy has a little bit more length in the front side here, but that all happens in the same period of time. And again, how he does that has a lot to do with what he's doing as the foot is coming off the ground. So instead of it being so much of a focus on lifting up with the toe, right? Because that's what happens here. And I see a lot of people get coached where it's like, as soon as that foot comes off the ground, you want to immediately be coming upwards with the foot. And while you do want to be able to get to that range, you also want to be able to fully maximize his push-offs. When Noah Lyles pushes off the ground, he's getting full range out of that right there. Okay. And that ends up making it so he can really propel himself forward at a very high level, where we're seeing here, we're just not seeing nearly as strong of a push-off. They're not using as much of the hips, as much of the hamstrings. Still a tall guy, still a strong guy, but just not fully mastering the ability to push off of the ground and not getting the same type of extension out of the foot. So that is, I think, the first thing that you really want to understand. Another thing that I think ends up being important is understanding the foot angle at push off, right? So as your foot comes off the ground, the more range you can get into here. So you can see right before we're getting push off, we're not seeing a very steep angle with the heel. Okay, we can see with Noah Lyles, a little bit more of a knee bend there, and he has more bend in that foot. So then as he's getting that push off, there's going to be more power there, right? When you have the heel up higher and more range to that big toe, now that push can be a stronger movement, where here we have the heel further down, and therefore as that foot comes off the ground, pushing off the ground, we're not going to have as much power. So I think the foot angle ends up being a big part of the turnover as well. And then once this happens, so we're seeing the foot come off the ground, we're getting a really good knee bend. I think an important thing to be able to see within your own running is, when is my foot at its peak, right? We can see here kind of foot at the peak, and really where is that peak. Okay, so we can see this, and then the peak is a little bit lower, right? Never gets to this full angle that we're seeing Noah Lyles achieve here. And by the way, I'm using Noah Lyles as an example here. If we go and watch all these sprinters, they're going to be pretty similar. You're going to maybe take away a few degrees here and there, but there's going to be a lot of similarities. This is what makes the great sprinters, right? Is because they're able to get to this elite level of range of motion, right? You could see with Arianitans, and that's really what brings the case where it's like, oh yeah, this is so much about genetics, blah blah blah, and it's like, I mean, Arianitan, I would say, is just as genetically gifted as Noah Lyles, potentially even more so because he's a little bit taller. And so for him to be beating him by this much, I don't think has much to do with genetics as much as it does the training, the mentality, the, things that happen outside of this particular event that makes it so then he's able to really separate himself. Just to tell you or give you an idea that like you can train to get better. You might not be able to train to be the fastest American ever in the 200, which is what this race is from, but you could definitely train to run faster. There's no doubt about that, and I think it's objectively proven at this point that can happen. There's some people that don't agree with that, but I think that is definitely something that is important to say here. And then from this position, and why this ends up helping is because now what happens is the knee comes up and the heel stays very connected here. So notice the action that we're getting out of the foot and out of the leg when you get the heel up. It's more of like a rising motion there, where I'll see a lot of people, when you end up having more of this position, they end up having to go outward a little bit more with the foot. So notice how the knee goes out, the foot goes more outward, as opposed to getting more of like an upward movement, right? When you get this heel up and behind, so this comes from a strong push off and then a quick knee bend, right? So you're pushing off, bend that knee quickly. Obviously, this is something that you want to be able to, if you can't do this naturally well, then you want to be able to kind of slow it down to work on it. And then from there, I usually cue people really try to squeeze with that hamstring to maintain the relationship with the calf and the thigh for as long as you can, to then get that upward reach that you can see Noah Lyles do a really good job of, which will make it so then that foot strike ends up being a lot more effective and a lot more powerful. Where we see here, that calf really never even gets to the thigh. So now that ends up being a very overextending type of a movement with that left leg. So then the landing is a little bit more out in front of the body. We can see here how he's landing. As much as I like landing on the front part of the foot, it's a lot different than if you're landing with the foot a little bit more underneath you, right? The idea would be as close as you can, you'd want to be able to land with that foot underneath you. And he might even be in a little bit better spot. He might be, hitting the ground at this point. It's hard to tell from this angle, but he does look like he might be a little bit out in front of himself with the landing. Not that you want to be necessarily right underneath you, but we could also see that he's landing and getting his weight back a little bit further, which then helps him in being able to transition more effectively off. The main focus we're going to be talking about is the turnover speed. And I think what's important to kind of finish off the concept here is getting that leg out in front and then really striking the ground in a way that makes it so then we're continuing to propel yourself forward. So what you don't end up wanting to do is too much of a downward motion. I think it helps to almost think like you're propelling yourself forward or pushing yourself forward. I'm big on the push. Like whenever I'm like coaching, I'm always trying to tell people push, 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 because I think that this ends up being super important. You're trying to really get into that position. So when you get here and then can really align your body and your foot in a way to make it so then you can effectively get back into your next push, I think that's going to be the most effective part when it comes to your turnover speed. And that's really what you're trying to do. You're not necessarily trying to move your legs faster as much as that is important. A lot of times people are actually moving their legs fast already. They have about the same time period of turnover speed as elite sprinters, but are just not covering the range. And so it really becomes, how can we continue to cycle the leg with that same speed while being able to maximize the range of motion? That ends up being the key. So, like this athlete was talking a lot about trying to improve their speed and having a lot of being very stagnant, stuck with like 2.5 seconds or something like that with the 20-meter fly, where, somebody like Noah Lyles is probably doing that in about 1.8 seconds or, somewhere in there, maybe even lower. And so what you want to be able to understand is, in order to get to that position, it a lot of times goes to how many steps are you taking. So if you're taking too many steps within a 20-meter range, then that's going to make it so you're not going to run as fast as Noah Lyles, who's probably doing that in, somewhere between 8 and 9 steps. Probably like 9 steps, I would guesstimate would be how long it takes him to run 20 meters. And so if you're running above 2 seconds, you're probably taking closer to 10 steps, maybe even 11 steps, just looking at off of this video. And if you're struggling with getting your times down, right, running a great 20-meter, running a great 30-meter, whatever, I would say the reason your times aren't great is because you want to be able to understand how to maintain your stride frequency, right, or stride rate, how fast your legs are moving. So you'd want to be able to kind of get that time while also figuring out how can I get more distance. A big part of that's going to be this pushing outward movement, and what are we doing in our backside once that foot comes off the ground? Are we going too quick to come back forward and limiting the amount of range that we're able to get through that makes it so then we can't get to that top speed? Or the other thing would be the front side. Are we making it so our front side is too short where we're not keeping that heel tight and then really extending that leg out? That ends up really helping if we can get into this position. There's some people that get like here or here and then just go straight down. And so that also is going to limit what our ability to cover distances, right? You want to be able to really maximize that front side to make it so then we're continuing to gain ground on each one of the steps. So hopefully that gives some clarity when it comes to your turnover speed. If you have any questions, you can leave those down below. But yeah, that's Noah Lyles and how he has such great turnover, and what are some of the things that you want to apply to your own sprinting to make it so you could run faster. And like the video, subscribe. We also have other videos that can help you out with the same type of concepts in the links right here. Thanks for watching. We'll talk to you soon.